it's always a bit nerve-wracking as a speaker, not knowing exactly what the people before you are going to say, that you could end up either being in violent disagreement or repeating exactly what they said. But in this case, I think we're safe that I'm in violent agreement and perhaps can build on the foundation that Jim and Dave so ably laid. Disruptive technology is a relatively recent term, hence the title of my talk, New Phrase. Its origins are 1995. Clay Christensen, a Harvard B School professor, coined it to describe his theory of Darwinism in business, if you will, the replacement and displacement of established firms by those who come with a new and exciting idea. As a techie, I always thought that was a very cool thing. It meant opportunities to build and grow new enterprises in the face of a well-established hierarchy. But I found, as I was giving talks overseas and using the phrase a decade ago and more, when the translators were trying to translate my slides, they got very nervous. They would come up, "You're sure you want to use this? Disruptive technology is a bad thing." Well, I guess if your job is one that is removed by disruption, it is a bad thing. And it seems to be one which then is an issue of angst for us. You know, we baby boomers think that anything that's occurred before our life really wasn't all that important or impactful, and that all of our problems are the perhaps most challenging problems that mankind has ever faced, and ultimately it's for us to solve them. And we've trained our millennials to take that to a new level. But in fact, I would argue, and Catherine did a nice job of previewing my next slide for you, that there are other generations that have seen this. It's not happened in our lifetime, but you take a look at what, depending on your age, perhaps your grandparents, your great-grandparents, or even your great-great-grandparents went through, because they look at the kind of change that rolled through between the 1880s and arguably 1910, 1920. A lot of it, in fact, birthed here, whether it was invented here or large-scale production began here. From all of Edison's innovations, electric light bulbs, that power grid utility, power generation, the recorded music industry, movies, to things that perhaps didn't get created here, but in many ways we contributed, like the automobile. Were it not for Standard Oil, set up shop in Linden, New Jersey, we wouldn't have had a petroleum refining industry, and therefore we wouldn't have had gas to fuel those automobiles. And little known, Trenton, New Jersey was in fact the tire capital, the rubber tire capital of the world up through World War I, before Akron assumed that notable position. Curtis Wright of the Wright Brothers Union produced the engine that Lindbergh flew from here to Paris. And so we've had our fingers in so many of these industries, from electricity, electronics, radio, broadcast television, and on. But these all happened in the lifetime of someone who grew up in a horse and buggy era. And from the time they were a working adult to the time they were mature workers, these things went not only from novelties to widespread and pretty much universal adoption. That's an awful lot of change to swallow. Do we think it had an impact on jobs? Will you tell me? Think about all of the jobs that disappeared, particularly we got rid of horses as our primary mode of transportation and of hauling. So not only did we get rid of stagecoach drivers and coachmen, but stable boys, street sweepers. Somebody had to clean those streets, as you can see. The horses leave behind a little bit of a residue. Blacksmiths, not that these jobs, and some of these jobs completely disappeared, but certainly we didn't need them in the volume that we did before. Gaslight, lamp lighters, street lighters. When we moved from gaslight to electricity, job gone. Things perhaps as silly as ice cutters and ice deliverers, as we got electricity, and that begat refrigerators. We no longer needed the iceman and the ice cutter, some of whom were in my hometown in Randolph. The local mill pond was a source. Telegraphers disappeared. So we switched from telegraph to telephone and ultimately other forms of communication. They all disappeared. But as I read a contemporary analysis of Newark industry in the late 1800s, they talked about the number of companies that had closed since the last census, but not by bemoaning it, because in fact twice as many new companies opened to embrace the new technology. And part of the answer is that the jobs per se don't disappear, but the functions remain, right? And so we don't have stagecoach drivers, but we need bus drivers. We didn't need mule teams on the Erie Canal or the Morris Canal. In fact, if any of you have been to Newark and ridden the light rail, that's the Newark portion of the Morris Canal, which became a mosquito haven, part of why they ultimately had to drain and shut it down. It became the track bed for the light rail system in Newark. We needed telephone switchboard operators instead of telegraphers. We needed alignment for the power company when we didn't need gas lighters, and on and on. And so it was a question of being able to retool our workforce to take on the new jobs, and in some cases, in fact, job multipliers, because not only did we need tires for our car instead of shoes for our horse, and gas instead of hay to feed our car, but we now needed mechanics, perhaps in greater numbers than we needed vets to tend to our horses. We needed car salesmen, we needed a whole industry that didn't exist prior to the onset of the technology. So what does this all tell us? Because we've lived through this once before and we adapted to it, there should be some sense of calm, and yet it's still our lives that are affected. So how do we talk about the future of work? Well, I always love to refer to one of our favorite historic laureates here in New Jersey, recently passed away, Yogi Berra, who in fact said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future, no matter what month it is, right, Jim? And it's particularly tough when the future is not a simple step away from the past and present. And it's not a linear extrapolation, to use Manitoba, to go from the world of today to project to where we are tomorrow, but that's why we're here today. So let's see if in fact we can make some intelligent guesses about where things are aggregated. Because if we, again, go back to Edison, he didn't invent the light bulb. The light bulb was invented around 1800. But he did perfect the manufacturing process for a filament that made it reliable enough and producible enough to get into full play. And I would argue that for many of these technologies, they're not brand new, but they're close enough now to impact and to deliver into the commercial marketplace that we can make a little bit more of an intelligent guess about where they are going and what their impacts might be for us. So I don't think I actually got the McKinsey report, but I found it by accident. So I stumbled into the right stuff. It might be divine intervention. But there are a couple of clusters because they cited 12 very significant areas of change that are going to impact jobs in the future. And they kind of cluster around two major divisions. The first I would call perhaps the automation division. Not just the IT division, but automation. We think about those different segments that are up there. Computers are kind of incremental. Right? You saw in Jim's talk. They had digital logic circuits. I think the first one was in Bell Labs in the 30s. There were computers in the 50s. I grew up with punch cards, and they were a business tool. And just because we shrunk it down to the desktop, you saw the example, right? Lotus 123 was still a business tool. So it wasn't having quite the pervasive impact that we now see. And what's the difference? Because those devices are now linked. They're linked by ultra-high-speed networks that allow them to get information faster than you could read off a floppy drive on an Apple II when that first came out. They're linked to virtually every other computing resource in the world, which now gives you an ability for computing-based systems to behave not like a person, but like a team, like a state or a city or a country. That's the game changer that comes to this, because up until now, the computer has been sort of a poor approximation to us. We love to make our things anthropomorphic, fancy word. We want them to be, we like our robots to be little people. They're not quite as good at us, but we can relate to them. But the power that you heard in David's talk comes when these things become interconnected. They become connected to information resources that are able to draw on real-time knowledge and do things that we as individuals can't and probably never will do. The robots of old were sort of physical force multipliers, right? The arms in the factory that would do the repetitive task, reproducible, perhaps more accurately than humans. The robots of the future have brains. They are systems that are knowledge-driven systems. Does anybody remember Benetton? What was the power of Benetton? They were taking real-time information from the retail outlets, identifying the buying patterns and figuring out what colors were hot and changing production to match demand. Well, now we can do that across virtually every industry. And that's part of what we've come out with this. The ability to really begin to look at mass customization. So why do we need the man and the robot in that automotive picture that you saw? Because in fact, we want our factories not to put out, like Henry Ford did, Model T in which you can get any color you like, so long as it's black. But we want ours to be customized and personalized to us. And you can do that with the sort of flexibility that this technology puts into the workplace. But it's not just IT. That's one of the big game changers, right? The IT automation intersection, the ability, that's one of the pieces of that, so let me not overlook. We talked about artificial intelligence, at least in the 60s, and we found that it ran out of gas because the AI of that era was logic-based programming. We were again trying to reproduce the way we do things at a cognitive level. Unfortunately, we didn't understand all the things we do at the unconscious level that allow us to operate at that level. The new AI is data analytics. We call it big data, but it's not great because it's big. It's great because it captures all of the variations around average behavior enough that we can begin to deduce rules when there are rules, even if we can't figure out Newton's law or E equals MC squared. And that's the beauty of the bigness, is that it's able to give us then patterns that we can use reliably over and over again by capturing the full realm of experience, not just our little narrow window on the world. That becomes, if you will, why the cloud is so important, because it gives us access to that kind of information and the ability to compute on it and identify the patterns quickly. But there are other mega trends too. The whole world of advanced materials. Two major elements. The one for this state that I think is most compelling is what's happening in the life sciences. Why do we talk about life sciences different from chemistry, and physics, math? Why is biology something different? Because we couldn't understand it well enough to treat it like we treated physics and chemistry. We didn't have rules. It was more observational behaviors that ultimately were taking place inside the nucleus of the cell, turning into biochemical messaging, that then propagated out the beating that influenced our shape and our form and our reaction to the environment and our ability to deal with disease and so on, were unfathomable. And so the best we could do is cause and effect, correlations, and unfortunately the average behavior was not something that was always a very good way of describing all of our individual variations and variabilities. So we're now on the cusp of really understanding what makes us us, and to be able not only to understand it, but to manipulate it. You've heard about the miraculous cures evolving for cancer, which human T cells are being taken out and trained to understand our particular cancer pathology and go back and overcome the barriers that those cells put up to prevent being attacked by the human immune system and create miracle cures. This is amazing. This transforms medicine from chemistry, organic chemistry, chemical engineering. We love it, but it transforms it to cellular biology, molecular biology. It's a whole new world, and a whole new world of possibilities. And on the basic material, again, I'm a polymer chemical engineer. And the advent of synthetic polymers, it began, in fact, here in New Jersey. It wasn't invented here, but it grew up here. George Bateman, the Bakelite, began it in Perth Amboy and then turned into Union Carbide, and the rest is history from there. But the whole world of novel synthetic materials, from nylons and Teflons, and on and on. We've sort of now gone to a generation where we can actually begin to make materials an atom at a time. And so nanotechnology, whether it's new materials with high strength to weight ratio, or it's ultimately self-assembling electronic systems at atomic dimensions, these are all things that are on the cusp. And so making those things, as well as using the products that use these things, open up whole new frontiers in job opportunities. Mass customization that I referred to before in the robotics section is another important trend, in which now we can really begin to think about whole new industries that cater to give you a product that's unique to you. So what does that mean now in terms of the jobs? We all feel like all the jobs are going. Well, part of the answer is a lot of jobs are not going away. The industries will morph. But traditional management jobs, HR functions, law functions, marketing functions, they're all still going to exist. The things that are going to disappear are the low-skilled jobs. Unskilled labor is an oxymoron. It's not going to resist in the future. But all the others, whether we talk about these new and emerging hybrid industries, or we talk about the reincarnation, redefinition of current industries, they'll still exist. The question from a Christian viewpoint is, will the companies understand enough to morph? Will Avis perhaps go from being a car rental agency to being the dispenser of autonomous vehicles available on demand so that people won't own cars? It remains to be seen. Some companies get it, some don't. Companies like IBM have shown a remarkable ability to continually go through rebirth and renewal. And yet the computers that we loved when I was growing up, had in high school and college, the DEC computers, they didn't get it, they're gone. In terms of projection of what sort of skills, you can see that from current time to a projection roughly 10 years out, there's some shifting around here of the sort of workplace skills that are most required. And they really put more and more emphasis on cognitive powers, the things that still make us unique and different from the machine. The ability to reason, the ability to create a problem solve, the ability to lead teams, perhaps as opposed to manage and integrate teams, become very important skills. So what does that mean for us as educators? The same problem we still haven't solved as long as I've been around. We've got to find a way to put the left brain and the right brain together. You know, I've watched over my life the Ivy League model that we all love and embrace of what was called a liberal arts and science education as I was growing up, become more and more a liberal arts or science model. We call out kids early on based on whether they're geekish or not. And we heard the science and math-oriented ones intensify that training, and we heard those who speak well, relate well to people in the other direction, and we hope that they're going to build both creative problem solving and analytic skills through exposure to those works in the arts. It's not working very well. So to cope in this world and to be able to react with our robot friends and become part of this enterprise, we really need to go back to basics and understand how we're going to be able to train people to understand the underlying technologies that they're managing at a gut level. We need the same sort of passion and excitement that ran through this country in the post-Sputnik era. One of the first things I ever wanted to be was an astronaut because I watched the first Mercury flight go up. I think I was in first or second grade, and I watched the moon landings as I was in high school. That influenced a whole generation, but that passion and appreciation for the STEM professions disappeared very quickly. We've almost blotted it out of our society. If we don't turn that around, we're going to be in deep doo-doo. So I know I'm beyond my budget of time. I hope that gives you a little bit of a sliver. We'll have plenty of time to talk about this, I'm sure, in the panel session. Thank you.